Hello. On today's video, the 13th episode of December, I would like to present to you Norton Commander version 5. I think that Norton Commander is the most popular DOS file manager you will ever encounter and one that is fondly remembered by many users. I will get a bit into details about it, and of course I will show you most of what happens. So, the first few interesting aspects are the following. Norton Commander, as you can also guess from the copyright, started in 1986. I think that from around 1986 to around 1992-1993 was the golden age of Norton Commander, meaning that the user installed base increased and most of the features that you see today were developed during that time. In many ways, Norton Commander changed forever the landscape of DOS file managers because it established some norms, some rules you're going to see, and of course those rules worked very well. So without further ado, let's mention what kind of rules we have over here. The first one is the obvious presence of a menu, a drop-down menu, that covers many functions, and of course the concept of having two separate vertical areas, two panels as they are called, where your files are being presented. And this means that it's very easy and straightforward to use. Also, you have a lot of function keys that are suggested on the lower side of the screen. So if you're going to press F1, you're going to launch help. F3 is going to be view. F4, edit. And many DOS file managers try to use the same concept and establish some rules or continued these rules and made very good use of them. And I think that this goes on to show how much we enjoyed using such programs instead of using the arcane commands you find in DOS. And actually, I think that all file managers fare quite well if they follow the same principles that were established by Norton Commander. Actually, this created a trend that was known as Orthodox file managers, because most of them were developed in the eastern part of Europe, in Eastern Europe or Central Europe, whatever you want to call it, because there is also a western part of Russia as well. And I think that they totally changed the landscape of those tools, and the success they had, of course, influenced many other developers that tried to create the same tools. So let me show you a bit of what you can find over here. Norton Commander, of course, incorporated much more than the simple file manager, and this was one of the reasons why it was so successful, because you had so much functionality available just by pressing a button. For instance, when you're going to view a file, you're going to see very well and very soon its content. When you do that, Norton Commander actually runs another program and shows you by swapping it presumably in memory, because I don't know exactly what kind of thing occurs. And then as soon as you're going to finish editing or doing whatever you want with the file, you can press escape and you get back to Norton Commander. This level of functionality that automates certain tasks is one of the major reasons why Norton Commander was very useful. And of course, it did not include only file viewers, but also editors. And this means that as soon as I'm going to try and make certain, let's say, operations like marking, replacing, copying, moving something. So if I'm going to press F5, copy, yes, and it copies the next line. Having this level of functionality and everything integrated in a single application suite was fantastic for that time. And particularly if you want to consider the level of functionality you would get out of a computer that was available in 1989. And think about it, computers were still quite expensive. Running a graphical user interface as Windows was not entirely possible or reasonable with some users, because you would have to have quite large hard drives, so more than 20 megabytes or around 20 megabytes at least, if you're not going to count applications. For a Windows free installation is actually the basic you could get. So quite a major amount of storage is required. And another aspect is the following: sometimes the Windows application would not run properly if you didn't have enough RAM. So if you had a 286 and you had around 2 megabytes of RAM, then running Windows was kind of a lot to ask. So there were many limitations that came into play. So actually those kind of applications, those file managers, made it possible to use a lot of computers that could not probably make the switch to a fully graphical interface. And another important detail is the following: while Windows 3 was quite well designed, Windows 2 or Windows 1 didn't catch that much market share. So for some users, making the jump to Windows would mean a tremendous amount of resources, financial resources they would have to set aside to buy a new computer. And sometimes this meant more than $1,000. And $1,000 in yesterday's money means around 2,000 or more today. So think about the amount of money you would have to set aside just to have a basic functionality, nothing else compared with what we have on a modern computer. So the situation changed a lot. You also notice over here shortcuts, like those marked with a different letter, S, D, C, which means that working with the keyboard is very easy. All right, you also have the typical copying or moving capability that is quite clearly obvious in here, with a lot of choices down the lines. You can also use filters, so you will only transfer certain files or certain files that abide to certain rules, as you set over here. So the functionality of the file manager is very high. And think about it, everything is ordered from this same interface, which means that it's very well thought of. Another feature you may know from various instances is the fact that there were also additional applications being offered with the file manager. And formatting a diskette or doing any sort of other functionality in the past required a separate application to be installed, or at least could not be worked with in a graphical user environment or something that resembled a graphical user environment, even if everything that you see over here is actually text mode. So it's very easy to display on the screen and very fast. So you can see over here a lot of options, including the ability to make a system disk, which would require additional commands or knowing certain parameters to do the same things in those. So it's actually very powerful in a lot of ways. You could also change the number of lines shown on the screen, which would mean that you could increase the density of files being shown, meaning you could fill the panels with more files and see more of what you wanted, although most users chose to have the much more readable which were entirely very easy to handle. All right, so let's see. Okay. Another very important feature you may notice on Norton Commander is the fact that you have various network utilities, and you may wonder what kind of utilities you may find. Think about terminal emulation, and this was very popular back then because with terminal emulation you could dial a different computer and you could transfer files or do any sort of other commands on it. So it was quite powerful. And of course you have the terminal emulation that I mentioned. Port not available because you don't have it, obviously. We are not using any sort of printer port or serial port, or parallel or serial port, because the printer port is actually parallel port. And you could do all sort of activities in here that would require, including accessing various bulletin board systems. So you had quite a major networking ability out of the box just by installing Norton Commander. Of course, Norton Commander was not particularly cheap. I don't know exactly, I don't have a price. I can guess that it was probably less than the price Windows was sold at, so less than $100, but I don't know exactly how much Norton Commander retailed for. And you also have various configuration settings. Like you could change, you can customize the screen using different colors. You can change the panel options of showing various files, selecting directories, and all sorts of other functionalities you would like, including showing the actual clock. And for the fun factor or for entertainment, you would also have a lot of screensavers that you could test. And some of them were funnier than others. Let's see. Okay. That is not what I wanted to show to you. Okay. So I'm going to press test and just make the attempt again. No, unfortunately I cannot switch display mode, so I would have to settle just with what we have over here. But keep in mind that there are certain animations that you could easily see on the screen, and those are used as screensavers. Screen burning was a possible occurrence back then, when you could run the same program hours upon hours, and this would make a permanent impact on the screen. So it was not impossible in the least to have such an occurrence, and you would have to be prepared for measures. And think about it, back then very few applications, if any, would enter something like a screen saving option that would turn off at least the vertical synchronization, so that there would be no image that would be sent permanently to the monitor after a specified amount of time. There were very few applications that did that. So it was also a gimmick, but something you may have used from time to time. Alright, regarding the panels, you can have all sorts of ways to organize information. You can use the brief presentation, that is actually what you see over here. The full, that would also present details about files. The info, that would just have a separate panel. This would eliminate the file list and would just offer various informations about the files. The quick view one, which I think is very interesting in some ways, because it would imply that you could just scroll on the left side through a directory, and then on your right side you would see the contents of files. So as you can see, a very good way of working with directories and seeing if it's actually what you wanted to before entering the edit mode. And I think that this functionality is great, and sometimes not offered by many applications that were available back then, and even some newer ones. We have grown accustomed to using a separate quick view panel in Windows and other modern operating systems and graphical user interfaces, but back then this was unheard of. And in many ways I think that Norton Commander changed a lot of expectations you'd have had with such programs. You also have the find file panel, but of course we are not using that, so probably you could have chosen a certain way to select files. Okay. What more is available? Various ways of sorting files by name, by extension, by time, by size, and you could also change the drive either by using the standard selection over here or by pressing another shortcut key like Alt and F1 or Alt and F2 in order to trigger changing the current selected drive. So this functionality, and of course you could have selected one drive on the left panel and a different one on the right, and all this level of functionality was actually incredible in many ways, and I will show you also the file finding capability. So as you can see, you can have a lot of options that would make it easier to identify a particular file, and you would see a list that would cover all those files, and you could even have the ability to enter the viewer with a specific file just by pressing I think F3. Yes, so you would navigate on the files that are found list, and you could trigger that send to panel, which of course would send all the files being found along with their path on a panel, and you could try to see which one is the one you need, or perhaps selecting them, because as far as I can tell this can also be done, so you can move them into another directory and you can do or delete them. You can do so many things after you chose the criteria for your file searching. And I think that it's very difficult to have the same functionality in most file managers. But as time went on, and of course other file managers appeared on the market, such as DOS Navigator and others, slowly this level of functionality was also offered in other commercial software products. And right now most software you're going to find, with the exception, notable exception of Norton Commander, are open source. So I think that it tells a lot about the wonderful story of those file managers and the, let's say, mature DOS era, when most of the software programs evolved so much that they used complex ways of addressing the user needs and offered fantastic functionality that was not available up until that moment. And I think that they succeeded very well in this respect. So I think that most of these programs were able to have a very, very good level of capability that you would not be able to see otherwise. And I think that it's important to fondly remember them and use them, because they are part of this wonderful heritage. Of course, Norton Commander was not a small program. I think it took around 5 megabytes, so you would have to set aside quite a lot of data. I think that this is not okay. Norton Commander 5 megabytes. So there is quite a lot of space, at least in terms of what you would typically find on a 1992 or 1993 computer, where probably around 100 megabytes would be available, and even more for a 1989 computer that would probably have even less than that size. And if we are thinking about other sorts of configurations, then again it's important. Also, it would not require a lot of memory. I think it can run mostly using conventional memory, and perhaps a small amount of expanded or extended memory. I'm not entirely sure. And you will also be able to use another major feature, and I almost forgot about that. You have on the lower part of the screen the command prompt, so you could type something like dir and you would see the results. You would just press Ctrl F1, Ctrl F2 to hide your panels, and you would see the output of your those commands. So for instance, you could use mem and you would see how much memory you would have available, and you could sneak a peek this way. So the functionality is quite large, and you could also use various parameters for your commands. And as soon as you finish your program, you are getting back to Norton Commander. So I think that all of these features were very well thought of and successful. So I hope if you find a copy of Norton Commander and run it on your computer, you're going to have a lot of enjoyment out of your retro machine or your emulator. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I think I covered most of what I had in mind. One small addition I would like to have. When you're looking at viewers, think about the fact that the viewers do not encompass only text file viewers. There were file viewers from many popular formats like the Word document format, of course, available back then, so probably Word 6, Excel, Lotus 1 to 3, and even, if I remember correctly, an image viewer that could open bitmap files. So quite a large functionality out of the box, and think about the fact that everything was sold in a package and available to the user in a package that was very well thought of. And also the same program you could have been using on a real mode DOS, or you could run it in a graphical user environment like Windows in a window, and you would have the same capability. So it's amazing in many ways, and I think that Norton Commander really changed the marketplace forever and made some of these rules established very well. And I think we owe to Peter Norton and the group that initially developed Norton Commander, and to others that followed the same principles and improved on them. And I think that is to be commended. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, thank you very much for watching.